our next and final speaker. He's preparing for Christmas by, well, with quite a bit of excitement because his son, Adam's going to be playing with the Bloomington Orchestra in the Mall of America Rotunda this Friday, actually, at 6 o'clock for a cancer fundraiser. So we're excited. So we should all go down there, down to the Rotunda. It'll be kind of cool. Fortunately, I have a conflict. I'd love to be there. Among the songs they're going to play is Cloud. So that's a really cool local, I think you probably all remember that song, written by a local guy. But anyway, the title of his speech is A Layman's View of How Technology Impacts Democracy. Please welcome Peter Hall.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and guest Christian. In the early 1980s, Ronald Reagan pushed for a major increase in defense spending, and among those items was a Strategic Defense Initiative, otherwise known as Star Wars. And many of you may remember David Carlisle's speech about how the system worked to shoot down enemy missiles before they could arrive in the United States. Well, this was a event, and whether it was feasible or not at the time was highly debated. But what it did was it scared the Soviet Union to smithereens, literally. They, after years of bringing leaders that were in their 70s, and then they die within about 3 or 4 years, and have to get a new one, they brought in Mikhail Gorbachev, who realized that the Soviet Union was never going to be able to keep up with their way of thinking. They were never going to be able to keep up with the American advances in technology, so they brought in glasnost and perestroika. Well, one thing led to another, and of course at the same time, computers were getting more powerful, getting smaller. They had the beginnings of the internet, and within a few years, the Berlin Wall fell and the Iron Curtain fell. And part of that was due to the spread of information via technology, because the Soviet Union satellites could restrict newspapers, they could restrict radio, but it was a lot harder to restrict information through computers. As they became more available, it just became really difficult. And even China tried to restrict Tiananmen Square, but that word got out about that. Through the 90s, computing power technology, phones became more available, and more countries, more autocrats fell like dominoes, and there was a blossoming of democracy. So as 2000 turned, was a feeling like, okay, this trend will continue. Well, unfortunately, it has not worked out that way in the intervening 18 years. We've had several events have occurred that have made that much tougher. After 9/11, there were efforts to make more security apparatus and homeland security and various ways to track people, which is necessary, but it's somewhat controversial. Ironically, however, technology may have saved the 4th 9/11 plane from crashing into the Capitol or the White House, because people had phones and because that flight was delayed, they got word and they were able to prevent that airliner from crashing into Washington. But as things have been continuing, there's been a couple of different things, and one could go back to a book that was set about the same time that Star Wars came around, 1984. And many of the Orwellian Big Brother concerns are around. We've got items like fake news, we have alternative facts, we have a lot of different, if you just hammer away on something, even though it isn't true, it becomes true in a lot of people's minds. And we have technology has broken down a lot of the different common sources of information we used to get, so people can be, you can be in your own echo chamber and not hear the other side. And that is one of the big challenges for democracy. Also, a government like China has figured out how to handle technology without opening themselves up to the rest of the world. And then you also have the non-state actors like Al-Qaeda and ISIS that have used technology to disseminate their toxic stew of venom around the world. Speaking as a layman, what are some possible solutions? Well, one thing to help thwart hacking with computers in elections, I say all ballots need to have some kind of paper backup. Minnesota's has the optical scan system, and we need to, that should be nationwide, so that if there's any issues or any irregularities, you have that paper trail that you can manually count. There may be other things that would help, things like the information that is being broadcast from ISIS or being put over the internet, or from places like Russia, it's turning out that there were some false pieces of information brought over, and this is where I think the internet service providers are going to have to take a stand on what is, are you going to just swallow this like a guppy, or are you going to be a little more discriminating and say this is questionable, vet the sources, much like traditional journalism where you had vetting of sources and not rushing things in before you can at least get a reasonable verification of the facts. There's been too much just taking this in, take the money and put it out there, never mind the consequences. Again, there are things that, because technology obviously isn't going away, but there are some things, and maybe in some, this is a challenge for people that know more about technology to discuss what might they do to thwart some of these bad actors. So what we don't want is the advent of authoritarianism coming back into the world. Mr. Postmaster.
Thank you, Peter.